Everything has gone wrong. Soros warns major financial crisis is coming. In a speech delivered Tuesday in Paris, billionaire investor George Soros warned that the world could be on the brink of another devastating financial crisis as debt crises reemerge in Europe, and a strengthening dollar pressures both the U.S.'s emerging and developed market rivals, and Europe, with Italy dragging worries about the possible dissolution of the euro back to the forefront, won't be far behind. Political pressures like the dissolution of its transatlantic alliance with the U.S. will eventually translate into economic harm. Presently, Europe is facing three pressing problems: the refugee crisis, the austerity policy that has hindered Europe's economic development, and territorial disintegration. Not only Brexit, but the threat that countries like Italy might follow suit. But in the near term, the U.S. decision to pull out of the Iran deal is straining Europe's alliance with its most important Western partner, just as the strengthening dollar is constricting financial conditions around the world. Until recently, it could have been argued that austerity is working. The European economy is slowly improving, and Europe must simply persevere. But looking ahead, Europe now faces the collapse of the Iran nuclear deal and the destruction of the transatlantic alliance, which is bound to have a negative effect on its economy and cause other dislocations. The strength of the dollar is already precipitating a flight from emerging market currencies. We may be heading for another major financial crisis. The economic stimulus of a Marshall Plan for Africa and other parts of the developing world, which should kick in just at the right time. That is what has led me to put forward an out-of-the-box proposal for financing it. Adding to the urgency, it is no longer a figure of speech to claim that the EU is in existential danger, Soros said. It's an obvious reality. The EU is in existential crisis. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, he said. To escape the crisis, it needs to reinvent itself. The United States, for its part, has exacerbated the EU's problems by unilaterally withdrawing from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. President Trump has effectively destroyed the transatlantic alliance. This has put additional pressure on an already beleaguered Europe. It is no longer a figure of speech to say that Europe is in existential danger. It is the harsh reality. The only way to prevent an all-out collapse, Soros explained, would be a €30 billion, $34.5 billion Marshall Plan for Africa that Soros believes would help stem the flow of migrants into Europe. Something that Soros finally admits is one of the biggest problems facing Europe. The EU, Soros believes, should use its largely unused borrowing authority to finance the plan. The alternative, Soros claims, is further territorial disintegration of the EU as countries that have largely suffered as a result of the monetary union contemplate leaving. To prevent this, Soros says Europe must acknowledge and address the flaws of the euro system, perhaps the most glaring of which is the euro created an entrenched two-tiered system of debtors and creditors. I personally regard the EU as the embodiment of the idea of the open society. It was a voluntary association of equal states that banded together and sacrificed part of their sovereignty for the common good. The idea of Europe as an open society continues to inspire me. But since the financial crisis of 2008, the EU seems to have lost its way. It adopted a program of fiscal retrenchment, which led to the euro crisis and transformed the eurozone into a relationship between creditors and debtors. The creditors set the conditions that the debtors had to meet, yet could not meet. This created a relationship that was neither voluntary nor equal, the very opposite of the credo on which the EU was based. As some will remember, Soros Fund Management, the family office that manages Soros money, which has mostly dedicated to his open society network of NGOs, closed most of its long EM positions after President Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. Interesting. Of course, where Soros sees dangers, others see opportunity. For example, Mark Mobius, unretired last month, opened a fund that he hopes will take advantage of opportunities amid the EM carnage, as analysts continue to see EM as the area that's most vulnerable to repricing in US dollars. And the rest is his full speech. Maybe I'll read the full speech later on. I'm just going to read the article. So this is something that, hell, we predicted this, I would say back in 2006. There was never a time frame for when it would happen because predicting declines are very hard. And remember, I was watching this movie say rates of descent are hard to predict because there's all kinds of factors when something starts falling. The U.S. decline was supposed to be a lot slower than this. I thought that it would take approximately, back then I said 40 years, maybe 50 at the outside for the cracks to actually start coming in, and basically this white Western society, white Western dominating society would actually start to slip and kind of slide downhill. Because of greed and mistakes and hubris, it kind of accelerated this process and basically cut possibly, 30, 40 years off of what my prediction? Go figure. But it's something that I've said well into the past. In fact, a buddy of mine, he gave a speech in London after we had talked about this, about the cracks that were forming in what we call global white supremacy. Now those cracks have turned into fissures, especially after the financial crisis of 2008 and the failed Mideast war policy. And then the aggressiveness of the Chinese taking advantage of these cracks and turning them into fissures and into gaps and basically fracturing what could be left of the white alliance. If what Soros says is true, and there's no way to know whether it is or he is or not, but the Pax Americana, or the domination of the United States on the globe, actually was keeping Europe together. And as long as the United States was showing leadership, Europe was glad to follow because they didn't want to go back to what they had experienced in the 18th, 19th, and the early 20th century. They didn't want to go back to fighting and killing each other. So they were happy to go along with United States leadership. But what happens when that starts to wane? What happens when the United States can't afford to lead anymore? What happens when you get not a centrist, but an isolationist president? What will happen to Europe then? What will happen to the rest of the world then? Like I say, rates of descent are hard to predict, but the direction is not. You know that it is down. It's something Carroll quickly predicted way back in 1966. It is a destiny that the United States and Western Europe has tried very hard to avoid. The cycle of civilizations is what it is. Will they be able to pull out of this trap? Nobody knows. Will they be able to protect Europe? Nobody knows. Will they dominate the world like they have done for the last 200-300 years? That is definitely not going to happen. They probably won't maintain the status that they had for the last 200-300 years. That probably won't happen either. What I was saying earlier, say when I first started my channel, seemed to be radical. Seemed to be extremely radical when I was first saying it. A lot of people couldn't, and didn't want to believe it. But now even George Soros is saying the same thing that I'm saying. And what does he say? He says you should take $35 billion and invest it in Africa, which is something that I said to the United States and Europe way back in 2005, 13 years ago. And I'm just a poor old man sitting in his living room. It is what it is. But some things aren't rocket science. Anyway, I'm going to leave off of here, and this is BGS out, and I will catch you guys on the next one.